I want to start with Oregon.
Okay.
Talk to me about Oregon. What happened last year? How do we feel about Anthony Brown? Is Oregon truly the odds-on favorite? Should they be the odds-on favorite to win the Pac-12 North, the Pac-12 as a whole? Where are you at with them?
Yeah, I mean, they obviously have what it takes as the team with like the clear talent advantage in the division. They absolutely have what it takes to win the division. So I guess, okay, so we're sticking with this automotive theme, I assume. So this is looking back, looking at the curb appeal, looking at the traffic ahead, the schedule, and seeing what's in the tank. What can they maximize with the amount that they have already in their gas tank of sorts? Last year, they were able to salvage a pretty disappointing stretch that I think began with the UCLA game, even though they won that game. They lose to Cal, they lose to Oregon State in very strange fashion, and still are able to pull out the division and conference. Well, technically not the division. Washington won the division, but Oregon won the conference because they were sent to the Pac-12 championship game in Washington's place, who couldn't because of not having an ability to field a team because of a COVID situation, which stinks, frankly. But Oregon made the best of it, and they beat USC, and they did so without having exceptionally consistent quarterback play, which is a very difficult thing to do win a conference without above average quarterback play consistently and at the end of games. Then they went on to lose to Iowa State in the Fiesta Bowl. The Clones were very impressive, capping off a terrific season. And the 2020 Oregon team was quite strange, right? It's the first year for Joe Moorhead running the offense, and at times it looked kind of brilliant, and at times it sagged, for lack of a better term. The defense prevented big plays, but got pushed around, especially against teams that it perhaps shouldn't have been. You look at the first half of that Oregon State game as a clear example. And the all-time recruiting level continues in Eugene. That's the sort of continuity there. And Andy Avalos moves on, defensive coordinator. He's now the head coach at Boise State, his alma mater. And Oregon hired Tim DeRuyter, longtime defensive coordinator, former head coach at Fresno State, away from Cal, where he was the co-defensive coordinator, though he had play calling duties, I guess, removed from his what was asked of him in 2020. But it comes with a very, very strong reputation as a defensive mind. And so he is now running the defense as they shift away from some of the things Andy Avalos experimented with. And I think it's going to be more of maybe like a 4-2-5 look is where Oregon's going. So that's where they were in 2020. Does all of that ring true to you?
It rings true.
Oh, and Tyler Shuck, the longtime starting quarterback, he transferred to Texas Tech.
Transferred to Tech. Yeah, we talked about him on the Big 12 show. One of the Big 12 shows that we did. So now as we move forward, Dan, some of the questions that I have about Oregon.
Yeah. Oh, there is one other element that I should mention as a deeply problematic Oregon homer. The season was also colored by the fact that they lost their best player to an opt-out in Penei Sewell, top 10 pick, starting left tackle, and their entire secondary save for, I think, a corner. So the nickel corner, Brady Breeze, or nickel safety, whatever he was playing, Javon Holland and Thomas Graham all opted out. So a unit was wiped out before the season began, but everybody dealt with all sorts of things. That's just happened to be what Oregon dealt with.
So I have three, I'll say, main questions about Oregon. The first is when they got Joe Moorhead. I think you were really excited about that.
Oh, yeah. Still am.
Okay. My first question is, with regard to Joe Moorhead, just as a coordinator, are you excited about him still the way you were initially? And then secondly, maybe as like a part B to that question, how do we feel like he'll interface with Anthony Brown?
Interface? Come on, Ty. You've left the corporate world behind. You know that. Just use the word click. Just use the word gel. I feel excellent about Joe Moorhead. And I think, this is across the conference, this is across college football, that first-year head coaches, to a bigger extent than first-year coordinators, they had it pretty tough without a full, real off-season. So I feel great, and from everything I've heard about what Joe Moorhead's full installation with a full off-season, from everything I've heard, the players and assistants are quite excited for the potential and ceiling of this offense now that it can be hypothetically fully weaponized and reach a new ceiling. The Anthony Brown question is legitimate and I think enormous because we've seen Anthony Brown play Power 5 football before, and he has shown flashes of being very good and has shown flashes of being lost and mistake prone. And he now has 2 torn ACLs, or 2 ACL injuries in his past. So physically, he probably isn't where he was. I think he's fine. I think he's absolutely fine. Now, Oregon's expectations are to challenge for a playoff spot, just in general. To win the conference, they've now won it twice in a row. So they have begun to set their sights higher, I believe. And the question that you ask, Anthony Brown gelling with Joe Moorhead. What does that ceiling look like if Anthony Brown reaches his peak and the offense is clicking on all cylinders? They're a playoff team. Now, they have Ohio State early on. We can get to that momentarily. But I think there are fair accuracy questions and fair killer questions. Physically, is Anthony Brown on the level of the better playoff quarterbacks that we've seen? I don't think he is. Now the question is, behind a good offensive line that returns a lot, with a very deep receiving core, though I don't know if they truly have a number one guy, and an experienced stable of running backs. Again, though, truly, I don't know if they have the guy, capital G, in the backfield, but they have what I consider to be a killer at coordinator. What does that offense look like? How, and especially within the context of the Pac-12, I think it can be very, very good. Ceiling-wise, I think if we are to understand Anthony Brown based on what he's done previously, they'll probably lose 1 or 2 games.
Yeah. Well,
that's just
okay.
That just seems to be the reality, where special quarterbacks can run the table. A pretty good quarterback with a lethal defense can run the table. But if you don't have clearly either, you lose 1 or 2.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll get to that schedule here momentarily. My second.
So you want to
question,
talk appeal, or just what's your second question? Sorry.
Well, my second big question, and I mean, answer this in any order that makes sense to you, but this is a defense that gave up, I think, 12 or 13 more points on a per game basis than in 2019.
Yeah.
How much, if any, of that means anything to you, given how odd 2020 was, and and Oregon only played a handful of games here. Like, do you take that with anything more than a grain of salt? Is it a trend that you're worried about? How do you feel about Tim DeRuyter stepping into that, knowing that there was some regression there defensively?
I feel pretty good. So Oregon's going to be healthier and more experienced. Obviously, they had to start guys and play guys who had no experience or very little experience, either because they were young or because they were transfers, or that they were thrown into a position where, maybe they were a third string and now they are, because of COVID, because of the opt-outs, starting. So there's more experience. They've recruited very well on defense. There was some experimentation on defense that I don't think fully made sense last year when you looked at where some guys on the defensive line were lined up. I think the defense will get better from where they were at their lowest points last year. I think because, look, they have the best edge rusher in the nation in Kayvon Thibodeaux. So gravitationally, even with newer guys and the guys who are going to be lining up next to him have actually performed pretty well. Now, there's a lot of question marks because there is some green in the rotation up front, but the attention that teams are going to have to pay to Kayvon Thibodeaux should open things up for both the linebackers behind him and the defensive lineman next to him. Justin Flowe was a 5-star linebacker. He got hurt early on last year. I believe he'll be starting next to Noah Sewell, the younger brother of Penei Sewell, who flashed unbelievable athleticism, but some freshman mistakes. I think he is a first-round talent at linebacker, Noah Sewell. Yeah. So if they can maintain health at linebacker, they've recruited very well in the secondary, but it's Mikael Wright is the proven piece and one of the better corners in the conference and probably one of the 10 or 12 best in the nation. If they can fill in those spots, if the younger guys who are stepping into bigger roles are as advertised, I think they'll be significantly better. Now, 2 of those guys in the secondary were just arrested, which is bad. That's my take. Being arrested, and it was an airsoft gun that they were found with, and they were allegedly shooting it out of car. Like, I don't know the exact details. If it is as bad as advertised, Oregon secondary will take a hit. those guys will be punished to whatever extent. That's Jamal Hill and DJ James. So that's Jamal Hill, sort of nickel corner safety, and DJ James expected to start at corner opposite Mikael Wright. So they have bodies there. They have guys there that were highly touted and come in with pretty good expectations. So defense is going to get better, but there are a lot of new faces to this defense.
Yeah. Well, moving forward then, looking at the road ahead.
Yeah. Well, by the way, I mentioned a lot of the offense, but like they are very deep on offense right now. It's just Anthony Brown doing his part.
Speaking in terms of the schedule, Dan.
Yeah.
49th toughest in the nation per our friend Phil Steele. In looking at the schedule, they've obviously got the Ohio State game week 2, which is the toughest game on the schedule, bar none. But it seems like it's spaced out pretty well. What does jump out at you, though, is that all of the hardest games on the schedule are on the road. They go to Ohio State, to UCLA, to Washington, to Utah. And there are a couple other road games. I'm not counting Stanford on that.
You should. But yeah.
You know, there are a handful of games there, all on the road, that they're going to have to get their act together and win those games away from home if, in fact, they want to do this playoff thing.
I agree. I totally agree. Yeah, the Ohio State game is going to be very difficult. Now, obviously, what's going to happen with those two defensive players is going to loom even larger. But you're right. I mean, at Stanford, while I'm not crazy about Stanford, they're a tough out. I think at least they won their last 4 last year. It was a closer margin. We'll get to that. But at UCLA, you know, stadium-wise, environment-wise, it's not the most difficult place to play, but I expect UCLA, if they're healthy, that's what sort of back end of the schedule. Yeah. I think UCLA starters in a number of places are pretty impressive, but it's a depth thing for UCLA at this point. And are they able to take that next step? So I'm not terribly worried about UCLA if Oregon is performing as expected. At Washington, especially if they can find some pop on offense, which is going to be my theme a little bit for the division, because the defense should be good. That's going to be crazy tough. And at Utah's always tough. So they are built to withstand and succeed, but it's a focus thing. It's an injury luck thing. It's an everybody gelling on offense around Anthony Brown thing. So no, it's definitely a tough schedule. It's definitely a tough schedule, but it's not impossible. They miss USC and ASU, I believe.
Yeah.
Not a bad twosome to miss in the division.
Do you think that Oregon can beat Ohio State on the road?
It's a big if. I've been asked this by a few different people, like radio interviews and stuff like that. It's turnover luck. It's beating 2 very good tackles for Ohio State. And Oregon has guys who can do that if you've watched them against SC. And it's, I said turnover luck, but also limiting receivers. It's easier said than done. But it's, turning 7s into 3s. So yeah. I would put Oregon's chances at about 28 to 33.5% of winning the game. It's in the shoe, but it's an inexperienced quarterback for Ohio State. It's a defense that is looking to bounce back from some low points, just within the context of expectations of Ohio State. Oregon can win that game, but it's, they're going to need to check off 3 to 4 things of, okay, we're limiting explosive plays. We're getting after, and I'm speaking on behalf of Oregon, getting after CJ Stroud and making him uncomfortable in his first big college game as a starter. So it's going to take a few things, but Oregon's built to win that game, just not more often than not.
Yeah. The over-under per Vegas is 9. That feels
9
low
wins?
to me. That feels really low to me.
Yeah, I would probably take the over. I'm worried about quarterback and what happens if Anthony Brown is either not the guy or gets hurt. We're talking about guys who've just not played at all. So it's, blue chip dudes. It's Ty Thompson, Robbie Ashford, and Jay Butterfield, but there is no meaningful snaps, if any, among those 3.
What's their final win-loss record?
I have them at 10-2. I have them losing to Ohio State and losing something characteristic of Oregon, like losing a winnable game on the UCLA or Cal, something like that, Washington, one of those.